Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for this important webinar. I'm Marc Freedman. I'm the founder and co-CEO of CoGenerate. We're a nonprofit organization bringing older and younger people together to tackle and help solve the leading problems of the day through bridging divides, forging connections, and co-creating a better future for people of all ages. This is a special day for us. This is the opportunity to launch the first of our CoGen challenges, the CoGen challenge for to advance economic opportunity. This is a challenge in which we'll be bringing together older and younger people to create a future in this country that's characterized by inclusion and prosperity. And I can think of no better way to do that than the conversation we'll be hearing between Ai-jen Poo and Eunice Lin Nichols. In addition to that conversation and the launch of the challenge, we'll be announcing later today the awarding of 8 $20,000 investments in solutions to bring the generations together to advance economic opportunity, coupled with an accelerator for those participating in those investments, and then a showcase which will highlight the work that comes out of it. One of the great joys of this project already has been working closely with the Aries Charitable Foundation, and the head of philanthropy and executive director of the foundation, Michelle Armstrong. We have huge gratitude for the chance to work together with them and the investment they're making in this challenge. And I wanted to turn the mic over to Michelle Armstrong so she could say a few words about why Aries is so committed to this issue and this work in bringing generations together.
Thank you, Marc. And I am so delighted to have the opportunity to be here with the group today and to talk a little bit about why we are partnering with CoGenerate for what we know is an incredibly important initiative. As the head of philanthropy at Aries Management Corporation and executive director of the Aries Charitable Foundation, our mission as a foundation is truly to help to accelerate equality of economic opportunity, with the vision that as a result of our hard work and working collaboratively with outstanding organizations like CoGenerate, we'll be able to better help people achieve their full potential. One of the ways that we strive towards advancing our mission is by supporting initiatives that encourage entrepreneurship. And when we say entrepreneurship, we don't just mean opportunities for those people who are actually standing up and founding businesses, but we also mean what are the opportunities that are made available in the communities where those businesses operate, including how does it help to improve the quality of life for people in those communities. In addition, as a firm, Aries pays very close attention to the concepts and the ideals of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we look at DEI through multiple dimensions, including age, when we think about how best to execute the work of the Aries Foundation. The CoGenerate Challenge and our partnership with Marc and Eunice and the entire team at CoGenerate truly wed these interests and objectives for us. And they also concurrently help to raise visibility for pressing societal issues like economic inequity. I have to say, on a personal front, I actually have followed CoGenerate for years, as Marc and Eunice know, dating back to when they were Civic Ventures and then when they were Encore, and now as CoGenerate. And I've always truly appreciated the care and the expertise which they have strategically and thoughtfully brought older and younger adults together. Even, for example, the program that they stood up that helped to bring older adults to work with third graders to improve their literacy skills. And I cannot think of a more timely point in our history to have this challenge than now. In just reading some data from the 2020 census, the fact that now in the US, 1 in 6 individuals is age 65 and older, when in 1920, it was just 1, or actually less than 1 in 20 who were age 65 and older. So this challenge is incredibly important for right now at this particular moment. The challenge is an initiative that I know that taps into the entire CoGenerate team's exemplary programs and expertise in actually executing those initiatives, not only to connect people to one another, but beyond that, to connect people to one another in ways that build knowledge, empathy, and awareness about how and why generations must come together and actually are more alike than perhaps they realize. So again, we are incredibly delighted to support this initiative. And I think I can speak for all of my colleagues at Ares Management Corporation when I say thank you to the CoGenerate team for your thought partnership and your thought leadership to execute this incredible body of work. Marc, I'll turn things back over to you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And in framing the conversation today, I'm just going to pick up right where you went with your remarks. And I think it all starts with the demographics. That the United States today is the most age-diverse society in human history. New research from the Stanford Center on Longevity shows we have roughly the same number of people alive at every age from 0 to 74. But if you even take a step back, 25% of the population is under 20 and 23% is over 60. So that's basically half of America. And at the same time, we have historic age diversity. We have continuing and historic age segregation. The United States today has been described as being in a state of age apartheid. There are so few opportunities for younger and older people to come together. And we're convinced at CoGenerate that that contributes to a whole set of problems, from generational conflict through misunderstanding and ageism, through isolation and loneliness. But just as important, maybe even more important, it's contributing to a missed opportunity. The needs and the assets, the experience and the perspective of older and younger people fit together like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. These groups can do together what no one generation can do alone. And to add to the timeliness point that Michelle made, we now know that there's deep pent-up demand on the part of older and younger people to do just that. We did research last year with the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago, and it showed how deep that well of interest on the part of older and younger people is to come together to work on these leading problems: loneliness, mental health, climate, and economic opportunity, which is why we launched the CoGen Challenge, which has 3 components. The first is a call to action, which we'll be doing today around economic opportunity. The second is catalyzing solutions to bring older and younger people together to work in this way. And the third part is a showcase to help disseminate and spread and advance these solutions. And I can think of no better duo to help kick off this inaugural CoGen Challenge than Ai-jen Poo and Eunice Lin Nichols. Ai-jen Poo has probably done more than anyone in the United States to put care front and center as an issue on the public stage. She's a remarkable social entrepreneur behind the creation of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, behind Caring Across Generations, a thought leader and movement builder, the author of The Age of Dignity, a frequent commentator in the New York Times, winner of the MacArthur Fellowship, and someone that we've worked together with and feel so honored to have been able to do so since 2013, when one of Ai-jen's lead organizers at the National Domestic Workers Alliance won a Purpose Prize in 2013. Barbara Young, who Ai-jen told me is still going strong today. And in conversation with Ai-jen today is my wonderful co-CEO at CoGenerate, Eunice Lin Nichols, a great leader in her own right, winner of the 2019 Irvine Foundation Leadership Award, and someone I've had the enormous privilege of working together with now for over 2 decades. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ai-jen and Eunice, and also just remind everybody that at the end of the conversation, we're going to be hearing more about the CoGen Challenge to advance economic opportunity.
Thank you, Mark. What a lovely introduction, and just so wonderful to be able to be here with iGen. I will start by just saying I've been a huge fan of iGen for a very long time. Like Mark said, since at least 2013, when I first got to know Barbara, when I was running the Purpose Prize. But I wanted to start really by asking iGen a bit about why this work is so personal for her. She and I share some traits in common, including the fact that both of our families are originally from Taiwan, and our grandparents played an important role in our lives when we were younger. So I'll let you kick it off with that. And as she does that, I know I've seen iGen speak a number of times before. Always appreciate the relational way she starts things. When we're live together, she'll often ask people to take time to talk to each other about somebody who's provided care for them or somebody they have provided care for. So I would hope you could honor iGen today in her process by putting in the chat, just shouting out somebody who's either provided care for you or a loved one or someone you provided care for. And then as iGen tells us why this work is personal for her, she'll also be able to get a sense for the love and support and commonality that's here in our audience with us.
Well, thank you so much, Eunice. It's such an honor to be in this conversation with you and Mark and Michelle, and a part of this really important launch moment for CoGenerate. This work is some of the most exciting and cutting edge and important work in the country. And I'm so happy to see so many people tuning in from all over the country and all over the world. Just the energy in the chat is so beautiful, including Barbara, who we just mentioned. I saw her, that she's tuned in as well. Shout out to Barbara Young. And just thank you so much. So yeah, in the spirit of honoring the people who have shaped our lives, which is something I usually do when I, as Eunice mentioned, when I start in a conversation with a group. My grandparents played a huge role in raising me. So I was raised in an intergenerational household. And there were many reasons for why that was: cultural, practical, spiritual perhaps, but I think when I look back on the person that I am, the way I approach solving problems, the way I approach building relationships, the way I see the world, so much of that is informed by experiencing an intergenerational household growing up. And I can think of no greater gift, honestly, in my life. And as I'm actually thinking a lot about my grandmother these days, because she was such an optimist. No matter what was going on in her life, in our lives. I remember when my grandfather had a stroke and he became paralyzed on one half of his body, and she became his caregiver. She, even though it was an incredibly challenging time to navigate and so much change and grieving a loss of a life before, she was so optimistic about what else might be possible if we were to actually lean towards the future. And I think as an organizer, I really got that from her, that there's always a path forward if we actually look at the future with curiosity. And I learned that from my grandmother, along with so many other things. And I think the curiosity about what could be different about our future is a huge part of what, and optimism is a huge part of what led me here. And I can't imagine doing my work any other way but intergenerationally, as I've had incredible women to help guide the way, like Barbara Young, who I met as a nanny in a park in Manhattan in 2001. And she's been a huge part of my life ever since. And there were many other domestic workers, caregivers, young and older, who raised me and made me the organizer I am today. So I'm just really following in lots of imprints across the generations.
I love that, Ai-jen. I often say when I helped to launch Experience Core Bay Area, that was my entry point into work that involved bringing older and younger people together to help kids succeed in school. I often describe my eventual team of 200 older adults as my surrogate grandparents. I also wanted to share, I don't know if I ever told you this, but I think my first touch point with some of the structural pieces of what you have really put on the forefront is when I had my two kids. I was still working part-time, and I felt really lucky. I found a woman on my block. She, like so many people you work with, like Barbara, was an older immigrant woman from the Philippines, had set up a home daycare. I was able to push my kids over in a stroller to her house. She was a surrogate grandparent to my kids because my own parents live far away. And I couldn't have gone back to work without her. And I love that she was embedded in my neighborhood. My kids developed a love for lumpia and pancit, and it was fantastic. But as she grew older, she didn't have the structure and the support and the retirement savings that she needed. Towards the end of her life, she ended up moving in with us because she was like family. And it became clear that her dream was to go home to the Philippines, which she hadn't been able to do for 30 years. And so a bunch of the families that she had cared for pooled money together, got her a plane ticket, connected with a nephew that she had last seen as a baby, and helped to move her back to the Philippines. And she passed away there a year later with family, which is what she wanted back in the home country she had left. I did not know that I was part of a care system. I didn't have at the time the language or the structures that you've helped me to see. Let alone the ways in which I was complicit in some of the failings of the work that is so important. So I'm wondering if you can say a little bit about why the generational lens is so important to the movement work you've been doing, in particular in creating caring across generations.
Well, first, that's such a beautiful story. I think you should write about it, and we should share it from the rooftops, because I think it is about how absent kind of an infrastructure and a system for care, people are still building it in the ways that they know how, and in their trust and their relationships with one another. And I think that that's one of the greatest sources of hope, that we can actually put a really strong, beautiful care infrastructure in place, because we're already building or planting the seeds of it in our own ways. And I think keeping generations segregated and a culture of segregation across generations is a big part of the reason why we've ended up in the situation as a country where we are so far behind in terms of a system or an infrastructure to support caregiving for families. I think at the end of the day, the reality is that families are intergenerational units, right? It's not one set of people needs one thing, another set of people needs another thing. It's actually that we are all interconnected and interdependent across generations. And we will sometimes need childcare, sometimes paid leave, sometimes aging and disability care, sometimes two at once, right? As you're in the sandwich generation, you understand there are lots of needs that are about being a part of an intergenerational family unit and intergenerational communities. And because we have so siloed the way that we understand our problems and our solutions, we haven't seen the whole and the opportunity of building the whole. And that is starting to change, thankfully, for the first time. It's like we are childcare advocates, paid leave advocates, aging and disability care advocates, care workforce and caregiver advocates are all working together in new ways to try to bridge those generational divides, to resist the ways that we've been pitted against each other, to resist a politics that is so zero-sum, that pits generations against each other, and in fact say, we have the capacity, especially when we bring generations together, to actually solve for and create systems and infrastructures that support us all in a holistic way. And I think what's at stake here is actually every form of inequity. The fact that we haven't been able to build a strong care infrastructure means that people with the least amount of power in our society and resources are the ones who really bear the brunt of that. And so it's women of color, low-income women of color, immigrants, people who are either overstretched as family caregivers or working for too little pay as professional care workers, and really holding us all together and up. Whereas it could actually be the kind of system that invests in all of our ability to take care of ourselves and the people that we love across age and ability. And I think that's where we can get to if we come together.
I love that. I wonder if I might get you to tell a story that I read in Age of Dignity, and then I heard you tell it again recently at the SCAN Foundation Advancing Health Equity and Aging Summit, where you spoke, because it's the story of how you launched the New York Workers' Bill of Rights. And there's a moment where I feel like when you talk about the age segregation in our country, often, students get funneled off into a college system, into higher ed. Older adults are often in senior communities, and it's not as often as we would like that older and younger actually get together to make change happen. But embedded in that story was a little gem about college students and how they ended up partnering with you. Can you say a little bit about that, and how did you get them involved? Would love to hear about that.
Well, the origins of the domestic workers organizing in New York are, it is very much about really listening. That's the thing about this work as an organizer, is when you really listen and listen with curiosity to learn about people's lives, the stories are intergenerational and the experiences are intergenerational and the needs are such as well. So, I started out sitting on park benches listening to the experiences and the wisdom of people like Barbara Young, who's working as a nanny in Manhattan. And many of those women were older immigrant women, some of whom had families of their own to care for, in addition to caring for other people's families as their profession. And what I heard was just a complete lack of protections, rights, fair pay, paid time off, a lack of real agency and dignity, and a set of expectations where they could go to work knowing that their work was going to be valued and compensated fairly. And so we started an effort. We brought together a large group of domestic workers at the first ever Having Your Say convention. And the vision was that we would hear from as many domestic workers as possible about what respect in the workplace would mean to them and what kinds of rights they felt like needed to be, if we were to rewrite the labor laws, what would really protect their dignity at work. And so about 250 women from across New York showed up after 6 months of outreach and talking to people. And we invited the law students at the NYU Immigrant Rights Law Clinic to come and to listen in to the small group discussions where women were sharing their stories. And coming out of those small group discussions, we had the workers had identified about 47 different provisions that they felt like needed to be addressed in order for the work to improve. And we prioritize those with the support, the research, the support of the law students. Eventually, they turned our priority provisions into a New York state bill that we took to Albany. They set up legislative meetings for us to meet with and find a sponsor for our bill. And they accompanied us for 6 years until the bill was passed, finding co-sponsors, preparing for hearings. They represented us. They were our lawyers as we fought to change the labor laws. And in 2010, New York became the first state in the country to pass a domestic workers' Bill of Rights. And Barbara was a huge part of that campaign. She was in the steering committee of Domestic Workers United, and really was a central part of that campaign from beginning to end, along with thousands of other domestic workers in New York. And we never could have done it without the young people who accompanied us through their law school experience.
I love that story so much because it takes the different assets that these two groups had. You often talk about look for unlikely allies. And I feel like these are two groups of people that you might not think would be in a room together, but you couldn't have gotten the work done without them both. I'm looking in the chat and I see some questions there, and I welcome our audience to put more questions there. We will have time for more Q&A at the end. But I wonder if we could get to some tips that you might have for bringing generations together. You already mentioned sort of that zero-sum thinking that pits old people against young people. Obviously, right now, our society is highly polarized, and if we're going to be honest, quite ageist. And that makes it much harder for people in organizations to see shared challenges and shared solutions and a shared future. Especially when it comes to economic security. There's something about economic security that I think causes us to go into our corners and say, it's either mine or it's yours. So I'm wondering how you have been able to bring about a vision of togetherness instead of people being pitted against each other.
Well, whenever we start a meeting at Caring Across Generations, we actually take time at the beginning of the meeting to turn to the person sitting next to us and share a story about someone who has cared for us or who we are caring for, and the meaning of that relationship in our lives. And just a few minutes of an exchange completely changes the energy in the room, because suddenly we realize that we have something in common with the person that we're sitting next to, which is that there's somebody who means a lot to us, who cared for us, and the fact that that person usually is somebody who is incredibly the relationship is a very emotional one, oftentimes meaningful. There's a sense of kind of breaking through a lot of the layers of separation that we often feel when we enter into a room with strangers. So it starts us in a conversation from a place of a common experience and almost a shared identity, either as somebody who has relied upon care or who has provided it as a caregiver. And so I think just getting going, helping people really immediately see the ways in which we're connected, it creates a different context for beginning the conversation. And then I think to point to the many instances of how people have come together across generations and really changed the conversation. And it's everything from, telling the story of the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights campaign and our big children's march being a huge kind of moment for us, where we realize, like, every time we march, we have to do it multi-generationally, because that's when we really feel the potential and the power of our vision, right? To the actual solutions of creating something like universal family cares, a kind of care infrastructure that supports childcare, aging and disability care, paid leave, everything we could need to care for ourselves and our families, for what matters most in life. If we start to put forward kind of things that expand people's ideas about what's possible, it puts us in a different logic, and I think gets us going in the right direction.
Yeah, that story of the first Children's March, I think, is so powerful, because you had children of both the nannies as well as the children who were being cared for by the nannies marching together. I think I remember you saying that there were two different signs: respect my nanny and respect my mommy. Mm-hmm. Which is so moving. And I think when I think structurally about what's happening there too, we often talk about generational bridging being a short bridge across some much more difficult differences. We get that from John Powell, somebody we both mutually love and respect. And I think about the fact that bringing the children together to have that idea for the march meant that you are actually showcasing and bringing about a coalition of children across class, probably across race, across many things, but those children would then grow up with a different view of what it means to make change with a lot of older adults that were on that road with them. So I love that. It brings me to another question I have, which is, I think you're so savvy about using the power of narrative and the power of emotion to mobilize people. Can you give us some examples of how you've used powerful stories and emotional truth to make change happen? That might be good lessons for us as we try and figure out how to advance economic equity across generations.
Well, I think that one thing that I have reflected a lot about is that there's kind of two truths that shape our reality. And there's what is factually true, and then there's what's emotionally true. And they're not the same, but both have a powerful impact on our choices, our behaviors, the way that we make meaning. And when it comes to care, for example, I think emotionally, factually, I think most of us know, like, we're doing the very best we can. I'll shout out to all the sandwich generation moms who might be listening in, or caregivers for a loved one with disability, or all of you who are tuning in. I know that you are doing the very best you can to care for the people that you love. And intellectually, factually, we probably know that this is what I can do. But emotionally, we still feel this sense of it's not enough. And I must have failed. Like, I must have the wrong job. I must be a bad mom. I must have not saved enough for care, or I must have, not bought long-term care insurance when I should have. And the truth is like, it's kind of designed to make us blame ourselves. The status quo, maintaining the status quo, is designed for seeing it as a crisis of personal failures as opposed to a system failure. And so we have to get people to a different place emotionally. And no amount of data or research or rational arguments, and I am a big believer in research and data, but I think at the end of the day, we really do have to figure out how to change how people feel. And if we don't change the way people feel about care as real work, or that is a collective social responsibility, as opposed to just an individual personal one, it is actually both. I think we're just not going to get to where we need to go in terms of solutions. So, we've done nobody better to help kind of think about what moves people's hearts than actual professional storytellers, people who make films and television and write books, fiction, people who there's an art and a science and a craft to creating narratives that really move people. And so we've partnered with storytellers, especially storytellers in the popular culture space, to try to bring caregiving to the foreground of how storytelling happens in film and television, as opposed to something that's kind of taken for granted and existing somewhere in the background. Actually leaning in to storytelling as kind of the next frontier of great human story. And that has really helped us. I don't know how many of you watched the series This Is Us, but the final season really leans into a caregiving storyline where Miguel takes care of the matriarch of the family. And there are just these moments that kind of show us mirror our lives in a different way that I think are so powerful, that actually give us a sense of like a different reality might be possible. And that's the kind of work that we're really excited about is how does popular culture storytelling help us imagine a different future culturally?
Yeah. We often think right now with this idea of co-generation, and not just one generation helping the other, but the mutuality of what both get out of it and what they can accomplish together, that's sort of having its heyday right now in storytelling, out in the media, in pop culture, in music, whether it be Brandy Carlisle and Joni Mitchell, or I don't know, every other movie I see right now, my kids will lean over and say, "Mom, is this another work movie?" Because it has some older and younger person coming together, unlikely allies, to do something, whether it be fight the zombie apocalypse in The Last of Us, to Everything Everywhere All at Once, or Abbott Elementary, you name it. It's everywhere. And I think you're right. Tapping into the power of storytelling is so important. I think we might have time for you to tell us a brief story, because I know you walked the red carpet at the Oscars. Can you just say how you got connected to Roma and why people should watch that movie?
Yes, so Roma is a film on Netflix. It's a narrative film set in the 1970s in Mexico City, in a neighborhood called Roma, Mexico City. And the protagonist is an indigenous domestic worker. And it's the story of the family that she cares for, and that moment in time in that family's life and in Mexican history, through her lens. And the filmmaker, Alfonso Cuarón, really wanted the film to be of service to domestic workers, who are in our own way trying to be protagonists in shaping the future of how work is valued and treated in the US and in Mexico. And so he connected really early on with us at the National Domestic Workers Alliance, and also with the Mexican Domestic Workers Organization, and invited us early to the first screenings of the film, and invited us to host screenings for domestic workers across the country. And we designed a campaign with the filmmaker, with participant media, and also with Netflix, where you can currently see the film, to introduce the story to audiences in a way that engages audiences after they watch the film and are moved by it, in some of the actions that can support domestic workers' rights in the US and in Mexico. And we ended up organizing screenings so that about 2,000 domestic workers were the first in the country to see the film before it was released widely on Netflix, so that they could use the film in their organizing locally, to strengthen rights and protections for domestic workers, to raise awareness about benefits for workers, about paid time off, and other campaigns that we had going on. And in Mexico, they were successful in getting domestic workers included in Social Security protections, leveraging the campaign around the film. So it was a huge opportunity to really put domestic workers in the center of the story, and then in this cultural moment or opening that the film created, helped to shift audiences' attention to the experiences of domestic workers today and what they might do to be a part of the solution. So it was a beautiful partnership, and huge thanks to participant, and also to Alfonso Cuarón and the entire cast of Roma, and all the producers, and also Netflix, who was a great partner as well in this endeavor.
I love the call to engage our culture makers in this work that is so important. I want to shift gears a little bit to another thing that you often talk about, which is one is sort of the power of narrative to make a difference. The other one is the need for innovation. I don't know if you use the words innovation so much, we use that framing, but I want to read a little passage from chapter 1 of your phenomenal book, Age of Dignity. For those of you who can be overwhelmed by huge books, this is not a big book. It packs in so much heart and some phenomenal ideas. I recommend it. It has aged very well. I think you wrote it, Aisha, maybe 10 years ago or something like that.
Mhm.
And so I'm going to read you this little passage because I think it gets at the importance of innovation. You say, we're going to have to rethink everything, how we live, work, and play, and especially how we organize our family and community life, how we take care of each other across generations. The public and private realms of life will necessarily come together in new ways because none of us will be able to find solutions alone. This process of establishing the necessary infrastructure for care will create significant economic opportunity. We can view the elder boom as an opportunity to respond from the basis of something that all of us across the political spectrum hold dear, our right to live with dignity, independence, and self-determination. From that place, we can work together to reorganize society so that in all phases of life, we can count on love, connection, and care. What could feel like the beginning of an epic national crisis in care can in fact be one of our greatest opportunities for positive transformation at every level. So I want to stick with that for a second. What do you think is the role of innovation in a society that is deeply out of sync? And where do you see opportunities specifically for co-generational innovation to address this kind of economic inequity that we're seeing in caregiving and beyond?
I think co-generational innovation is going to be essential to navigating the future. And I think the best innovation is happening in a co-generational model. And I think it is true that nobody really knows what the future holds, and that there's wisdom at every age, and we can't afford not to be drawing upon all of that wisdom to try new things and test new ideas. And I think that it's kind of like my friend Franklin Leonard talks about the film Hidden Figures. I don't know how many of you have seen that film, but it is the story of the Black women in NASA who helped to take us to the moon, and the experiences of racial and gender-based inequities that they faced every single day in that journey. And yet still, they took us to the moon. And imagine, right? The film forces you to actually think, like, what if racial and gender barriers didn't exist? Where would we be? We would all be flying around in carbon neutral jetpacks. Like we would, it really is about how are we tapping into the best of us across race, class, ability, generation to solve for the future. And any one way in which we become siloed, any one set of people who face undue barriers, that is hindering us from actually solving for and meeting the future with a posture of possibility and power. And so that I think I would just say that it's like, to me, it's fundamentally about the creativity that we will need, considering the challenges, the incredible challenges, some of which are existential to the future of our species. Like, we just can't afford to leave any talent, creativity, and imagination on the table.
Yeah. Yes. You're it's like preaching to the choir here. Absolutely. So if I push you on this piece, because we've gotten some questions in the chat box, we have many people in the audience who are in that space of caregiving, struggling. We have many practitioners in our audience who are part of kind of the care system. Mm-hmm. When you think about how where the levers for change are, yeah. Can you speak about that? And that ranges every, it's people like, do we start with multi-generational household? Do we start with policy? Do we start with wage? It can feel really overwhelming. So do you have some? What are the tactics here, or specific examples?
Yeah. I think from a cultural standpoint, really shifting from this binary, like really thinking about what are the binaries that are holding us back. And I think this idea that it's either a personal responsibility or it's a collective one, and a public good, that binary, I think we need to shift and say that we need a system, an infrastructure to support us, or when it comes to care. And it doesn't mean that we then give up our personal responsibility. In fact, it invests in our ability to take care of the people that we love. It's an investment in that. And so I would say that culturally, any way that we can put care in the center of a conversation about public policy, public infrastructure, public investment, collective solutions, I think is really, really important. And then from a policy standpoint, I think it's about, one, understanding what of our current policies are actually working, what of our policies are not working because they are underfunded, and then what needs to be reimagined entirely, right? There's kind of three policies. And I think that we need to fully fund the existing care infrastructure that we have so that we can actually understand what is it that needs to be fully reimagined. And then I think we need to reimagine these systems to be more inclusive so that more of us can afford the care that we need, and more of the people who are caring actually have support, have the ability to take care of themselves, actually have the ability to have agency to work or not work, to to care collectively or independently, right? There's all kinds of choices that having an infrastructure can enable that we currently don't have at our disposal. So in terms of policy, whether it's local, state, or national, how can we make care more affordable, more accessible, and how can we better support the people who are providing that care? And that is, I think, the next few years as we reimagine the big systems change that needs to happen.
Can you speak a little to, one, I know that this past spring, President Biden passed some of the most sweeping changes through an executive order that have impacted the care world. So I'd love you to say a little bit about that. But I'm also interested to know, will any of that, do you feel like, will that impact the way health systems work? What else still needs to happen from a systems perspective or from a policy perspective?
Thank you for that question. I will say that, a lot of us who are caregiving currently probably feel just a little, maybe a lot exhausted and maybe a lot cynical that the kind of change we need is really even possible. And I will say to you, as somebody who's been doing this work for more than 20 years, that the kinds of change that we've seen in the last few years is really extraordinary. We are headed into a moment of generational change when it comes to caregiving. And this is a moment to really kind of for all of us to rise up, to lift up, to make this the next big national policy priority in this country. And we came very close to a historic transformational investment in home and community-based care for older adults and people with disabilities, in childcare, and in paid leave. The House actually passed a bill that was a transformational investment in our care infrastructure. It didn't make it through the Senate. We came up just a couple of senators short from actually making that the law of the land. But coming so close is an indication that we are winning. Like, we are on track. We are moving. We are building. And so we have to make this has to be what comes next. And the president in April signed the most sweeping set of executive orders on care, directing every federal agency to do everything in its power, absent new funding from Congress, to make care more accessible, to make the jobs in the care economy better jobs so that we don't keep hemorrhaging workers in the care infrastructure, and then to try to modernize care policies to the extent now federal agencies have limited power, but the president basically put a stake in the ground and said, we want HHS, DOL, every treasury, everyone to do everything in their power to make the care process better for families and for workers. And so what's next is for Congress to act. And I think all of us showing up as voters, as leaders in the community, as church members or congregants, to basically say, we want this to be a community priority. We want this to be the next big policy priority, I think is what's going to kind of tip it over the edge in the next big policy moment that we have.
I think that's so great. And, sometimes I think about the ways in which even the siloing of policies and government can be at such cross purposes with the kind of thing you're talking about, whether it be different plans for early care and education created in completely separate rooms with separate people from people who are launching plans for how we age better, and how can we bring those policymakers together and be on the same page and see a shared solution. I want to switch gears a little because we only have a few more minutes. We've had some questions about, is there a role for technology? And I also know we have some folks in the audience who represent philanthropy, either individual donors or traditional philanthropy. Are there roles for funding and technology to make a difference here?
Yes, absolutely. Well, technology is going to be central to everything in the future. So absolutely, there is a role for technology. And I will say that caregiving is one of the most kind of important and emotional roles in our lives. And it is also very challenging. It's hard, it's complicated, there's a lot to navigate. And there are aspects of the caregiving experience that technology can help with to ease some of the hardship of caregivers, whether they're family caregivers or care workers. I often talk about this piece of technology called the Hoyer lift, which is an assistive technology to help lift people who have mobility challenges. And it is, if you've ever seen it, it looks like something straight out of the Flintstones. It's like I don't even understand how we're still using it, but that's the technology that we use oftentimes to move people who have limited mobility. And I think the key with technology is to make sure that it's being deployed towards enhancing the human experience, towards equity, towards opportunity, towards job quality, towards human interaction, human benefit, human well-being, as opposed to profit, and which is where the incentives currently are. Technology is a tool like anything else, and it can be used for good, for opportunity and equity, or it can be used for all kinds of other things. And that's the thing that we need, is to ensure that whatever it is, whether it's AI, whether it's caregiving robots, that we're designing in a way not to replace the human, very human kind of role that is caregiving, but is about enhancing that, supporting that. And if we can figure that out, I think that so much is going to be possible. And for the funders and the donors on this call, this is our moment. This is a moment to really go big on care and do it from an intergenerational standpoint, from a holistic standpoint. This is kind of a generational transformation moment, and we have to go big in terms of our imagination and in terms of our investment in what's possible. And I think, Marc alluded to this at the top, but put the need for childcare, paid leave, and aging and disability care in our immediate lives aside for a moment. When we think about some of the existential threats that we face, whether it's about loneliness and social isolation, or it's about economic inequities and just how unsustainable our economic model is, or it's about the political polarization that keeps pulling us up further and further apart as a country, care, I think, intergenerational, co-generated care models are a huge part of the solution. And if nothing else, helps us to anchor in to what matters most amidst all of the uncertainty.
Ai-jen, I can't think of a better place to end our conversation. I'm very sad to end it than with your words, go big. Go big, because we deserve it. This is an issue that impacts all of us. We all require care when we're young. We require care as we age, whether we are being cared for or giving the care. We do need to do that together. And so much of that is at the heart of how we can live in a more equitable society with each other. So with that, I'm going to say a big thank you. We will share with you, because I know that you wanted to stay very focused here. There's an amazing chat box going on here with so many people who are the reason you do your work. I want to make sure you'll get a chance to see that. And so I want to say thank you. And then I'm going to pass things over to my colleague, Christina Rodriguez, who's our director of the CoGen Challenge for Advancing Economic Opportunity. And she'll close us out with where to go from here. So thank you, Ai-jen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eunice and Ai-jen, for this dynamic conversation today. I want to remind you of a few things. So the CoGen Challenge is already open. You can visit our website, and we'll also drop that link in the chat. And if you have a solution that brings youngers and olders together to advance economic opportunity, please apply for the CoGen Challenge. The solutions can be around caregiving support, job training, healthcare, housing, quality education, and so much more. The applications are open today and close on October 16th, and we will have our first information webinar on September 27th, 9 a.m. PST and 12 p.m. EST. So stay tuned for our next thought leadership conversation that's coming up. And on behalf of the CoGenerate team, as well as Ai-jen Poo and the Aries Charitable Foundation, and everyone who made this event possible today, we're looking forward to seeing you soon and to reading your applications for the CoGen Challenge. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a fantastic day or evening wherever you're joining us today.